I'm Lena, 24 years old, and everything changed when my phone rang at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night with my father's panicked voice telling me my mother was dying and needed emergency surgery that our insurance wouldn't cover. The call jolted me awake in my studio apartment, Raymond's voice shaking as he explained that Helena had collapsed at home and was being rushed into an operating room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. "They need $5,000 up front or they can't proceed with the surgery," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "The procedure has to happen within the hour, and our insurance is claiming it's experimental, so they won't authorize payment." Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and join me as I share how a family emergency became the most expensive lesson of my life. Growing up as the younger daughter in the Mori household meant being the responsible one from an early age. While my sister Cleo spent her teenage years partying and dating, I worked part-time jobs and saved every dollar I earned. Our parents, Raymond and Helena, had always struggled with money management, living paycheck to paycheck despite Raymond's decent salary as a middle school principal and Helena's work at a dental office. There were always small crises that required immediate financial intervention. The car breaking down right before a family wedding, requiring $800 for repairs that had to be paid that day. Helena's root canal that couldn't wait until the next pay period, needing $1,200 immediately. Raymond's prescription glasses breaking during a school board meeting, demanding $400 for emergency replacement. Each time, they would call me with the same urgent tone, the same explanation that they had no other options, the same promise that they would pay me back as soon as possible. The payback part rarely happened according to schedule. What was supposed to be repaid in 2 weeks would stretch to 2 months. Then 4 months, then they would make partial payments of $50 or $100, until eventually the debt would be forgotten or absorbed into some new emergency. I had learned to factor these family loans into my budget, treating them as donations, rather than actual loans to avoid the disappointment and frustration of asking for money that would never be returned in full. My checking account balance reflected years of these small rescues, keeping me perpetually behind on my own financial goals, while my parents and Cleo seemed to assume my willingness to help was infinite. That night, sitting in my dark apartment with Raymond's voice crackling through my phone speaker, every instinct told me something felt different about this emergency. The timeline seemed impossibly tight, the details vague, and the amount significantly larger than their usual requests. "What kind of surgery does Mom need?" I asked, trying to sound supportive rather than suspicious. Raymond's explanation was rambling and unclear, something about internal bleeding and a procedure that had to be done by a specialist who didn't take insurance. "The doctor said it's life or death, Lena," he said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine terror. "We've already signed the paperwork, but they won't start until payment is confirmed." My bank account contained $7,300, the result of months of careful saving from my job at a marketing firm and the freelance graphic design work I did on weekends. $5,000 represented almost everything I had managed to accumulate, money I had been saving toward moving to a better apartment and building an emergency fund of my own. But Helena was my mother, and despite the complicated dynamics of our family's financial relationships, the thought of her dying because I hesitated over money was unbearable. I accessed my mobile banking app with shaking fingers and initiated the transfer to Raymond's account, watching my balance drop to $2,300 in a matter of seconds. "The money's sent," I told him, feeling simultaneously relieved to have helped and anxious about my suddenly depleted savings. Raymond's gratitude was effusive, promising to pay me back within the month and telling me how much this meant to the family. "Helena's going to be so grateful when she wakes up," he said. "You saved her life tonight, Lena." I tried to sleep after the call ended, but spent the remaining hours until dawn staring at the ceiling, wondering why the hospital couldn't have arranged some kind of payment plan or why Raymond and Helena hadn't mentioned any health problems during our weekly family dinner just 3 days earlier. The next morning brought a text from Raymond with a brief update that the surgery had gone well and Helena was in recovery. I felt a mixture of relief and pride, thinking I had made the right choice despite the financial sacrifice. I went to work distracted, checking my phone repeatedly for updates about Helena's condition, wondering when I would be able to visit her in the hospital. My coworker asked why I looked exhausted, and I explained about the emergency surgery and the money transfer, feeling oddly validated when she praised me for being such a caring daughter. 3 days passed with minimal communication from my parents, just occasional texts saying Helena was resting and recovering well. I had expected more detailed updates given the severity of the situation Raymond had described, but I attributed their silence to being overwhelmed with hospital routines and Helena's care needs. On Friday afternoon, I was sitting in a client meeting when my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Helena had posted a photo of herself on a beach, tanned and smiling, wearing a bright yellow sundress with a tropical drink in her hand. The caption read, "Surprise recovery trip. Sometimes the best medicine is paradise," with location tags showing Maui, Hawaii. I stared at my phone screen for a full minute, convinced there had to be some mistake. The photo showed Helena lounging on pristine white sand with crystal blue water behind her, looking healthier and more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. Her face was glowing with a tan that certainly hadn't existed 3 days ago when she was supposedly fighting for her life in a Northwestern Memorial Hospital operating room. I scrolled through her Instagram story and found video after video of her and Raymond exploring tropical gardens, eating at oceanfront restaurants, and clinking champagne glasses at what appeared to be a very expensive resort. My hands were shaking as I excused myself from the client meeting and locked myself in the office bathroom to process what I was seeing. The timestamp on Helena's first Hawaii post was from yesterday morning, less than 48 hours after Raymond had called me in panic about her emergency surgery. I kept refreshing her profile, hoping the posts would disappear or reveal themselves to be old photos she had mistakenly uploaded. But each refresh brought new content from their apparent vacation. A selfie of them in matching resort bathrobes, a photo of an elaborate seafood dinner with a caption about celebrating life, a video of Raymond attempting to surf with Helena laughing in the background. I called the main number for Northwestern Memorial Hospital and asked to be connected to Helena Mori's room. The receptionist put me on hold for several minutes before returning to tell me they had no patient by that name currently admitted or recently discharged. "Could you check under Helena Chen?" I asked, thinking perhaps they had used her maiden name for some reason. Another hold, another negative result. "What about any emergency surgeries performed on Tuesday night?" I pressed, feeling desperate and increasingly nauseous. The receptionist explained that she couldn't provide specific information about procedures without patient consent, but confirmed again that no Helena Mori or Chen had been treated at their facility in the past week. My next call was to Raymond's cell phone, which went directly to voicemail. Helena's phone did the same. I tried calling 3 more times over the next hour. Each attempt met with the automated message that their voicemail boxes were full. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were apparently too busy enjoying their Hawaiian vacation to answer calls from the daughter who had funded it. I felt sick, thinking about how frantic and worried I had been for the past 3 days. How I had been planning to visit Helena in the hospital over the weekend. How I had been telling people at work about my mother's life-threatening surgery. That evening, Noah came over to my apartment and found me sitting on my couch with my laptop open, obsessively checking my bank statements and my parents' social media accounts. He had been dating me for 8 months and had witnessed enough of my family's financial dramas to understand the pattern, but even he seemed shocked by the Hawaii photos. "Maybe there's an explanation," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Maybe the surgery was successful, and the doctor recommended immediate travel for her recovery. I showed him the hospital's confirmation that Helena had never been a patient there, and watched his expression shift from confusion to anger. "You need to confront them about this," Noah said, scrolling through Helena's increasingly elaborate vacation posts. "This is fraud, Lena. They lied to you about a medical emergency to steal $5,000. But I felt too stunned and humiliated to take any immediate action. Part of me still hoped there was some misunderstanding, some explanation that would make sense of the situation. Maybe Helena had been treated at a different hospital. Maybe the surgery had been scheduled and then canceled at the last minute. Maybe they had decided to use their own money for the trip and planned to pay me back when they returned. Over the weekend, I became obsessed with documenting every detail of their Hawaiian adventure. Screenshots of Helena's posts about spa treatments and shopping excursions. Photos of Raymond at a golf course that charged $300 per round. Videos of them at restaurants where I could see the menu prices in the background, meals that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I started calculating the expenses in a spreadsheet, estimating the cost of their flights, hotel, activities, and dining. The numbers kept climbing well beyond the $5,000 I had transferred. Sunday night brought a group text from my sister Cleo, asking if I wanted to join the family for dinner Tuesday night to celebrate Mom's recovery. The casual tone of the message, as if Helena's miraculous healing and subsequent vacation were perfectly normal events, pushed me over the edge of disbelief into rage. I called Cleo immediately, expecting her to be as confused and concerned as I was about the situation. Instead, she seemed irritated by my questions and defensive of our parents' choices. "They needed a break after the stress of the health scare," Cleo said, when I confronted her about the Hawaii posts. The doctor recommended rest and relaxation. When I told her that Northwestern Memorial had no record of Helena being treated there, Cleo's story shifted slightly. "Maybe it was a different hospital. You know how Mom gets hospital names mixed up when she's stressed." I pressed her for details about which hospital, what kind of surgery, why no one had mentioned this mysterious doctor's recommendation for immediate tropical travel. But Cleo became increasingly evasive and eventually accused me of being jealous that our parents hadn't invited me on their trip. Monday morning at work, I accessed my online banking and discovered something that made my stomach drop. The $5,000 transfer to Raymond's account had been just the beginning. Over the past 3 days, while they were posting vacation photos, there had been additional charges on a credit card I had added Raymond as an authorized user on years ago for true emergencies. Hotel charges for $4,000, airline tickets for $3,000, restaurant charges, shopping purchases, and cash advances that totaled another $8,000. The family emergency that I thought had cost me $5,000 had actually cost me $20,000, and my parents were still in Hawaii with 3 more days left on their apparent vacation. I called in sick to work Tuesday morning and spent the entire day pacing my apartment, alternating between panic attacks and rage-induced crying jags. The dinner invitation from Cleo had become a trap I couldn't avoid, the only opportunity to confront my parents face-to-face about what they had done. Noah offered to come with me for moral support, but I knew this conversation needed to happen within the family first. I printed out copies of my bank statements, screenshots of their Hawaii posts, and the hospital's confirmation that Helena had never been treated there, organizing everything into a folder like I was preparing for a court case. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, Helena answered the door with an elaborate display of frailty, moving slowly and speaking in a weak voice about how grateful she was to be alive. She was wearing a flowing scarf around her neck that she claimed was covering surgical bandages, though I could see the tan lines from her Hawaiian bikini peeking out above the fabric. Raymond hovered around her protectively, making a show of helping her to the couch and asking repeatedly if she needed anything for her pain. Cleo sat across from them, nodding sympathetically and praising their strength during such a difficult time. "I'm so glad you're feeling better, Mom," I said, my voice carefully controlled as I sat down with my folder of evidence. "I was really worried when Dad called about your emergency surgery." Helena's performance continued with weak smiles and grateful nods about how the surgery had saved her life and how much my financial help had meant to the family. "The doctor said I was very lucky," she said, touching the scarf around her neck. "If we had waited even another hour, I might not have made it." I pulled out the first page of evidence, a screenshot of Helena's Instagram post from the beach in Maui. "This is interesting timing for someone who just had life-saving surgery," I said, placing the photo on the coffee table where everyone could see it. The room went silent for a moment before Raymond launched into an explanation that sounded rehearsed and desperate. The surgery had been successful, he said, but Helena's recovery had been complicated by stress and depression. Their family doctor had recommended immediate travel to a warm climate for her mental health and healing process. "Which doctor recommended this?" I asked, pulling out more screenshots of their vacation activities. "And which hospital performed the surgery?" Because Northwestern Memorial has no record of treating Helena Mori or Helena Chen. Helena's weak voice suddenly became stronger as she accused me of violating her privacy by calling hospitals and checking up on her medical care. "Can't you just be happy that I'm alive instead of playing detective?" she demanded, the frail act dropping for a moment before she caught herself and resumed the wounded tone. Cleo jumped to their defense, claiming I was being unreasonable and insensitive to question Helena's medical needs. "They've been through enough without you interrogating them," she said, glaring at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. "Mom almost died and you're worried about money." I placed my bank statements on the table, highlighting the $20,000 in charges that had accumulated during their Hawaiian vacation. "I'm worried about the fact that a medical emergency somehow required spa treatments and championship golf courses," I said. The room erupted into competing narratives and accusations that revealed how far my family was willing to go to maintain their lie. Raymond claimed the additional credit card charges were for medical equipment and follow-up treatments that I wouldn't understand. Helena insisted that the tropical environment was medically necessary for her recovery process. Cleo accused me of being selfish and materialistic, caring more about money than my mother's life. Every attempt I made to present factual evidence was met with emotional manipulation and accusations about my character. "This is what's wrong with your generation," Raymond said, his voice rising with indignation. "You think everything has to make sense on paper, instead of trusting your family." He launched into a speech about family loyalty and how disappointed he was that I would question their honesty during such a vulnerable time. Helena began crying, claiming that my accusations were causing her more stress and potentially threatening her fragile recovery. "I thought I could count on my daughter to support me," she sobbed, "but instead, you're treating me like a criminal." The gaslighting reached a crescendo when they turned the conversation to my financial contributions over the years, reframing every previous loan as a gift they had never asked for. "We never forced you to help us," Cleo said, echoing our parents' revised history. "You offered that money freely, and now you're trying to control how we use it." They painted my concerns about the Hawaii trip as evidence of my selfish nature, my inability to celebrate Helena's recovery, and my fundamental misunderstanding of what family meant. By the end of the evening, I felt more confused and angry than when I had arrived. My evidence had been dismissed, my concerns had been twisted into character flaws, and my family had closed ranks against me with a unified narrative that made me the villain in their story. As I gathered my papers and prepared to leave, Helena made one final attempt at manipulation, grabbing my hand and whispering about how much she loved me despite my hurtful accusations. "I hope someday you'll understand that family means standing by each other no matter what," she said. I drove home in a daze, replaying every moment of the confrontation and questioning my own perception of reality. Noah was waiting in my apartment with takeout food and patient ears, ready to listen as I recounted the evening's events. "They're never going to admit what they did," he said after hearing the whole story. "And they're going to keep manipulating you until you accept their version of events." That night, lying awake beside Noah, I realized that my parents had stolen more than $20,000 from me. They had stolen my ability to trust my own judgment and my faith in the fundamental honesty of family relationships. The next morning brought a text from Cleo asking if I was ready to apologize to our parents for my hurtful behavior during dinner. Reading her message, I felt something shift inside me from confusion to clarity. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history or gaslight me into accepting their lies. I was going to find out exactly how deep this deception went, starting with a call to Aunt Marigold, Helena's sister, who had always been honest with me about family matters. If my parents had done this to me, I was beginning to suspect I wasn't their first victim. I called Aunt Marigold the next morning, expecting to share my story and receive sympathy or advice about how to handle my parents' deception. Instead, her long silence after I finished explaining the Hawaii situation told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. "Oh, honey," she said finally, her voice heavy with recognition rather than surprise. "They got you, too." The conversation that followed revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that stretched back years and involved multiple family members who had all been sworn to secrecy about their experiences with Raymond and Helena. Aunt Marigold's story began 3 years earlier when Helena had called her crying about Raymond losing his job and their mortgage being in foreclosure. She said they needed $8,000 immediately or they would be homeless by the end of the week, Marigold explained. Helena was sobbing about how embarrassed they were to ask, how they had nowhere else to turn, how they would pay me back within 3 months when Raymond's unemployment benefits started. The urgency and desperation had felt so real that Marigold had liquidated part of her retirement savings to help them, only to discover later that Raymond had never lost his job and their mortgage had never been in jeopardy. The revelation about Aunt Marigold opened floodgates of similar stories from other family members who had been isolated and manipulated by my parents over the years. Helena's cousin Marcus had loaned them $5,000 for what was supposedly emergency dental work that insurance wouldn't cover, then saw photos of them at an expensive resort 2 weeks later. Raymond's brother David had been told they needed $3,000 for urgent car repairs, only to watch them trade in their supposedly broken vehicle for a newer model the following month. Each victim had been made to feel like they were the only one being asked for help, the only one who could save Raymond and Helena from their latest crisis. What made the pattern particularly insidious was how my parents tailored each lie to exploit the specific vulnerabilities and triggers of their target. With Aunt Marigold, they had used the threat of homelessness because they knew she had experienced housing instability as a young mother. With cousin Marcus, they had focused on medical emergencies because his daughter had special needs requiring extensive health care. With me, they had chosen a life-threatening surgery scenario because they knew I would never risk letting Helena die over money, regardless of my financial situation. I spent the afternoon making calls to every family member I could think of, slowly piecing together a comprehensive picture of Raymond and Helena's fraudulent activities. The amounts varied from a few hundred to several $1,000s, but the tactics remained consistent. A sudden emergency that required immediate money, emotional manipulation about family loyalty and love, promises of quick repayment that never materialized, and always the insistence that their situation was unique and temporary, not part of any ongoing pattern of financial irresponsibility. The most disturbing discovery came when I called my parents' neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had known our family for 15 years. She revealed that Raymond and Helena had approached her 6 months earlier about borrowing money for what they acclaimed were urgent home repairs to prevent foundation damage. "They showed me photos of cracks in your basement wall," she said, and explained how the city was threatening to condemn the house if the repairs weren't completed immediately. Mrs. Chen had loaned them $4,000, money she couldn't really afford on her fixed retirement income, believing she was helping friends avoid losing their home. That evening, I drove past my parents' house and saw Raymond washing a brand new SUV in the driveway, the same model that cost around $45,000, according to my online research. This was the car they claimed to have purchased with a loan from Helena's credit union. But I was beginning to suspect that none of their explanations about recent purchases could be trusted. The house showed no signs of foundation problems or recent repairs, contradicting the story they had told Mrs. Chen about urgent structural work. Noah found me, sitting in my car outside my parents' house, taking photos of their new SUV and trying to calculate how many people they had defrauded to afford their recent lifestyle upgrades. "This is bigger than just what they did to you," I told him as he slid into the passenger seat. "They've been running cons on family members and friends for years, and I think the Hawaii trip was just their latest and most expensive scheme. The $20,000 they had taken from me was probably just a fraction of the total amount they had stolen from people who trusted them." The next morning, I called my bank and asked to speak with a representative about potential fraud on my account. Ms. Bennett listened carefully as I explained the situation with my parents, the fake medical emergency, and the unauthorized charges on my credit card. "Unfortunately, since you willingly transferred the initial $5,000 and your father is an authorized user on the credit card, this becomes more of a civil matter than criminal fraud," she explained. "However, we can help you document everything and explore options for recovering your money." Ms. Bennett walked me through the process of gathering evidence and filing complaints with various agencies. She also mentioned that banks were required to report suspicious patterns of financial activity, and my parents' behavior over the past few years might have triggered some internal alerts. "If you're willing to provide detailed information about their other victims, it could help build a case for financial elder abuse or fraud," she said, "especially if they've been targeting elderly neighbors or relatives with limited incomes." That afternoon, I received a call from Cleo asking why I had been spreading lies about our parents to extended family members. Apparently, Aunt Marigold had confronted Helena about the similarities between my story and her own experience 3 years earlier. "Mom is devastated that you're trying to turn the family against them," Cleo said, her voice tight with anger. "She's already fragile from her surgery, and now you're making everyone question their motives when they were just trying to survive their financial difficulties." The call with Cleo revealed that my parents had been feeding her a completely different narrative about their recent financial activities. According to Helena and Raymond, they had been the victims of medical debt and job insecurity, forced to borrow money from family members because of circumstances beyond their control. They had apparently convinced Cleo that their Hawaii trip was a legitimate medical necessity, prescribed by doctors, and paid for through careful budgeting rather than fraud. "You're destroying this family with your paranoid accusations," Cleo said before hanging up on me. That night, as I organized all the evidence I had gathered into a comprehensive timeline, I realized that my parents weren't just opportunistic liars who had gotten carried away with one vacation. They were systematic predators who had been deliberately targeting vulnerable family members and friends for years, using sophisticated emotional manipulation to extract money while maintaining their reputation as struggling but honest people. The scope of their deception was so extensive that I wondered how many other victims were out there. People who had been too embarrassed or isolated to share their experiences with anyone else. The next week brought a development I hadn't expected when Ms. Bennett called to tell me that my parents had attempted to access additional credit using my personal information. "We flagged the application because of the fraud alert you placed on your account," she explained, "but they provided your social security number, date of birth, and employment information in an attempt to open a new credit card with a $15,000 limit. The attempted identity theft pushed their crimes beyond family manipulation into federal territory, and Ms. Bennett connected me with the bank's fraud investigation unit. Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Division took my case seriously, in a way that surprised me after months of being dismissed by my own family. He explained that identity theft, combined with the pattern of targeting elderly victims, like Mrs. Chen and Aunt Marigold, elevated this beyond simple family disputes into criminal fraud territory. "We've been seeing more cases like this where family members exploit their access to personal information and emotional leverage," he said. "The key is documenting everything and getting other victims to come forward officially." Within days of filing the police report, I discovered that my parents' financial problems were far deeper than I had imagined. Aunt Marigold called to tell me that Helena had reached out to her again, this time claiming they needed $12,000 immediately because Raymond had been diagnosed with cancer and needed treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. "I almost believed her again," Marigold admitted. "But after our conversation about your situation, I told her I needed to see medical records before I could help. Helena had hung up on her and blocked her number. The cancer story represented a new level of desperation that suggested my parents were running out of victims and options. I started checking their social media accounts obsessively, looking for clues about their current situation, and found evidence that they were preparing to leave town. Helena had posted photos of herself decluttering their house, with boxes and furniture arranged as if for a garage sale. Raymond had made vague comments about exciting new opportunities and fresh starts that sounded like they were planning to disappear before their lies caught up with them. My suspicions were confirmed when Mrs. Chen called me in tears, explaining that Raymond and Helena had approached her about buying their house quickly and quietly. They said they needed to move immediately for Helena's medical treatment, she explained, and they offered to sell me the house for $30,000 below market value if I could pay cash within 2 weeks. Mrs. Chen had been tempted by the deal until she remembered the money she had already lost to their foundation repair scam and decided to call me instead. Noah helped me research their property records and discovered that Raymond and Helena had taken out a second mortgage on their house 6 months earlier, borrowing against the equity to fund their lifestyle while simultaneously soliciting loans from family members. The house sale Mrs. Chen described would barely cover their debts, leaving nothing for the people they had defrauded over the years. They're planning to take whatever cash they can get and disappear, Noah said as we reviewed the financial documents Detective Morrison had helped us obtain. The confrontation I had been dreading came when my parents arrived at my apartment unannounced, having somehow gotten past the building's security. Helena looked older and more haggard than I had ever seen her, while Raymond's usual confidence had been replaced by an aggressive desperation that made me grateful Noah was there. "We need to talk," Raymond said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "This family meeting is long overdue." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense manipulation and gaslighting I had ever experienced. Helena cried about her deteriorating health and claimed that the stress of my accusations was literally killing her. Raymond alternated between rage and wounded victimhood, accusing me of destroying the family over money while simultaneously demanding that I drop all charges and investigations. "Blood is thicker than water," he kept repeating, as if their genetic connection to me somehow justified years of fraud and deception. The most chilling moment came when Raymond threatened to sue me for defamation and harassment, claiming that my conversations with other family members constituted a campaign to damage their reputation. "We know you've been spreading lies about us," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to call Detective Morrison tomorrow and tell him this was all a misunderstanding, or we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you really are." Helena added that they had kept detailed records of every dollar I had ever borrowed from them during college, claiming I owed them far more than they had ever taken from me. Their threats revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even me. They had apparently been documenting our financial interactions for years, preparing for the possibility that they would eventually need ammunition against me. Helena pulled out a folder filled with receipts and records, claiming they proved I had been financially dependent on them well into adulthood and had no right to question their recent requests for help. "We raised you, we paid for your education, we supported you when you couldn't support yourself," Raymond said. "This money belongs to us anyway." The visit ended when Noah threatened to call the police unless they left immediately. As they gathered their papers and prepared to go, Helena made one final attempt at emotional manipulation, grabbing my hands and speaking in the weak voice she had used during our family dinner weeks earlier. "I'm your mother, Lena," she whispered. "I brought you into this world and I love you more than anyone ever will. Don't let money destroy our relationship." But her performance felt hollow now that I understood the calculation behind every gesture and word. After they left, I sat on my couch feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. Their visit had revealed the full extent of their desperation and confirmed that they knew their schemes were unraveling. Detective Morrison had warned me that confrontations like this often happened when financial predators realized they were about to be exposed, and their threats indicated they were preparing for a final attempt to escape consequences. That night, I received a series of text messages from Cleo accusing me of traumatizing our parents and demanding that I reconsider my vendetta against the family. But interspersed with her angry messages were questions that suggested she was beginning to doubt the narrative Helena and Raymond had been feeding her. "Did they really try to steal your identity?" she asked in one text. "Are you sure about the hospital thing?" in another. The cracks in their story were finally reaching even their most loyal defender. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Detective Morrison called to tell me that Raymond and Helena had been arrested while attempting to board a flight to Mexico, using fake identification documents. They had been caught at O'Hare Airport with $47,000 in cash, stolen credit cards belonging to 3 different family members, and a detailed notebook containing personal information about dozens of potential victims. The scope of their criminal enterprise was far beyond anything I had imagined, and I was no longer just a victim, but the key witness in a federal fraud investigation. 6 months after my parents' arrest at O'Hare Airport, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Raymond and Helena Maury plead guilty to charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case using the evidence I provided, combined with testimony from 11 other family members and neighbors who had been victimized over a 4-year period. The total amount of their documented fraud exceeded $120,000, money stolen from people who trusted them during manufactured emergencies and fake medical crises. The courtroom was filled with familiar faces, people I had grown up calling aunt and uncle, and cousin, all of us united by the shared experience of being deceived by Raymond and Helena's elaborate lies. Aunt Marigold sat beside me, holding my hand as the judge read through the lengthy list of charges and victims. Mrs. Chen had flown in from Chicago specifically to deliver a victim impact statement about how their foundation repair scam had depleted her retirement savings and forced her to move in with her daughter. Each story followed the same pattern of manufactured urgency, emotional manipulation, and broken promises that I had experienced during that 3 a.m. phone call about Helena's fake surgery. Detective Morrison explained to me that the notebook found in their luggage contained what investigators called a victim matrix, detailed profiles of family members and acquaintances that included financial information, personal vulnerabilities, and notes about which emotional triggers would be most effective for future cons. My entry included observations about my rescue complex and fear of family medical emergencies, showing how methodically they had studied and exploited the psychology of everyone around them. The level of premeditation was staggering, turning years of what I had thought were desperate requests for help into calculated crimes. The judge sentenced Raymond to 4 years in federal prison and Helena to 3 years, followed by supervised probation and restitution orders that would require them to repay every documented victim. The restitution amount seemed meaningless, given that investigators had found evidence of gambling debts, luxury purchases, and hidden accounts that suggested most of the stolen money was already gone. But the symbolic victory of having their crimes officially recognized and punished felt more valuable than any financial recovery could have been. Cleo attended the sentencing hearing and approached me afterward with tears in her eyes and an apology that had taken months to formulate. "I can't believe I defended them," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of guilt and anger. "I thought you were being paranoid and vindictive, but seeing all this evidence, hearing what they did to so many people..." She had been living in denial about our parents' true nature, until the FBI interviewed her as part of their investigation, forcing her to confront the reality of their systematic deception. Our relationship remained strained, but her acknowledgement of the truth felt like the beginning of a possible reconciliation. The months following their sentencing brought unexpected healing and connection with family members I had barely known before the investigation. Aunt Marigold and I developed a close relationship built on our shared experience of being manipulated and our mutual commitment to supporting other victims. Mrs. Chen became like a surrogate grandmother, often inviting Noah and me for dinner and sharing stories about her own journey of recovery from financial abuse. The extended family that Raymond and Helena had systematically exploited became a chosen family united by resilience rather than genetics. Noah and I used the insurance settlement from the identity theft case to move into a larger apartment and start planning for our future together. The experience had tested our relationship in ways I never could have anticipated, forcing him to understand the depth of psychological manipulation I had endured and helping me recognize the difference between healthy and toxic family dynamics. His patient support during the investigation and trial had shown me what genuine care looked like, free from the strings and conditions that had characterized every interaction with my parents. My relationship with money and financial boundaries changed fundamentally after understanding how my parents had exploited my generosity and guilt. I learned to say no to requests for financial help without feeling selfish or uncaring, and to recognize emotional manipulation tactics that had once been invisible to me. The therapy I started during the investigation helped me understand how growing up in a household where love was conditional on compliance had made me vulnerable to their specific type of abuse. Learning to trust my own perceptions and instincts became a daily practice rather than an automatic response. The business I had worked so hard to build suffered during the months consumed by police interviews, court appearances, and emotional recovery, but my colleagues and clients showed understanding and support that reinforced the value of the legitimate relationships I had cultivated. Ms. Bennett from the bank became an unexpected mentor, helping me understand financial systems and protections that could prevent future victimization. Her guidance led me to volunteer with a nonprofit organization that educated people about family financial abuse, turning my painful experience into a way to help others recognize and escape similar situations. 2 years after their sentencing, I received a letter from Helena in federal prison, attempting to reestablish contact and suggesting that she had been a victim of Raymond's influence rather than an equal partner in their crimes. The letter was filled with the same manipulative language and false vulnerability that had characterized our relationship for years, proving that prison had not fundamentally changed her approach to relationships. I showed the letter to my therapist and then threw it away without responding, feeling proud of my ability to recognize and reject her continued attempts at emotional manipulation. Today, as I write this story, Raymond and Helena are scheduled for release within the next year, but they will return to a family and community that fully understands their true nature. The restraining orders and financial protections I have in place ensure that they cannot repeat their crimes against me, and the network of informed family members serves as a support system for anyone they might target in the future. The scared, isolated young woman who transferred $5,000 during a fake medical emergency has been replaced by someone who understands that real family doesn't require financial sacrifice to prove love. Sometimes people ask me if I regret reporting my parents to the police, or if I feel guilty about their imprisonment. The truth is that their arrest probably saved other people from being victimized, and their conviction provided closure for the many family members who had carried shame and confusion about their experiences for years. The $5,000 transfer that started this nightmare led to justice for 11 families and protection for countless potential future victims. In the end, the most expensive lesson of my life became the most valuable one, teaching me that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into.